Back in 2011, 5 years after the debut of the MotorStorm franchise, the world was irreparably changed forever. MotorStorm Apocalypse marked the last big installment in the series before Evolution Studios collapsed like a neutron star, too bright and beautiful for its own good. Apocalypse followed up Pacific Rift with a major detour involving earthquakes, tornadoes, and self-doubt.
This doesn't make any sense, man!
To this date, it is still one of the most chaotic racing experiences of all time, right up there with the time I drove my brother's RC car over a G.I. Joe. Looking back on it now, over a decade later, has been an absolute joy. But as with all road trips, it's not always a perfectly smooth ride. The first thing I noticed when I entered an apocalyptic race for the first time in probably 8 years was how absurdly good the sound design is. I felt like I had both ears pressed against the surface of the Earth as an asteroid shattered the mantle. MotorStorm has always had good sound effects and music choices, but this one was a step above. At this point in the series, much of the mechanics weren't in need of any refinement, and yet there were still plenty of updates across the board. The UI was slightly tweaked to be more clear, the vehicle control was more snappy and responsive, and the amount of self-destructive civilians was dramatically increased. The biggest addition was the destructive maps. The new hazards were dynamic and exciting, and there were times that I'd replay a match just to see a special event again. To be honest, I don't know how these races got approved in the first place. With tanks on the beach, rifles in the street, it really gives you that authentic feeling that you're driving on the interstate. This is one of the few instances where I can't wait for someone to throw a Molotov cocktail at my car. Thankfully, it wasn't just an influx of obstacles that were added. Beneficial water jugs and ponds that chill your engine were increased so you could stand a better chance of keeping cool under the pressure. However, as with other MotorStorm games, sometimes the greatest obstacles are the other drivers. They'll rough you up if you give them an opening, they'll go out of their way to cut you off, and one driver even threatened to tell my grandma to stop giving me Werther's Originals. That would have really hurt. Regardless of the drivers in your immediate vicinity, you're never too far ahead to relax, and it's never impossible to make a recovery. One of my favorite additions was the first of its kind difficulty selector. It was now possible for drivers like me to win more than one game every 29 races. I found that Veteran was the closest to the earlier game settings, but Pro was the best at maintaining my ego. Although this was the first game in the series to sport full 1080 HD, some visuals like crashes seem to have been downgraded. There were more options and modes than before, but they didn't take full advantage of the new setting and stuck with standard time attack races or just increased the difficulty. Although this is likely not a problem for anyone but YouTubers trying to capture cinematic gameplay, for the first time ever there was no ability to watch a replay without having stuff on the screen. When I discovered this, it didn't make me cry, but it did make me cry. The courses in this game were mostly good, but there still was not a lot of tracks. Just rehashed maps with different hazards in varying levels of success. This is par for the course for MotorStorm games, but when you realize there are technically only 10 different maps, it does let the air out of your tires, so to speak. Speaking of airheads, we must discuss the elephant in the room. The strangest inclusion in Apocalypse had to be the story mode. The story itself is very forgettable and is only there to give a little context to this particular MotorStorm festival, something no one ever asked for. While everyone else is fighting a civil war, we're enjoying some friendly competition with like-minded motorheads. It's very cut and dry. The cutscenes themselves feel very out of place. The art style doesn't match previous entries, and the animation themselves are, riveting. The good thing about the cutscenes is that they're also tutorials that teach you basic mechanics after you've already finished like 10 races.
Any questions?
To be fair, there are several cutscenes that provided genuine entertainment value.
I put together a presentation. Why should you leave? Because I will kill you if you don't.
When you're locked into a race though, that's when everything clicks. Drifting has never felt better. There are a plethora of secret paths. The physics feel lighter but faster, which is great for instigating wrecks. There were new vehicle types, all of which felt more accessible than before. The backgrounds are more vibrant than ever. The way the camera moves away from you like a passenger being pulled by momentum was a really nice touch. And did I mention the sound design is absurdly good? MotorStorm races always have great endings, and this has some of the best. Once you have played for long enough, you'll realize that there's not quite enough variety in apocalyptic events. There's no alien sterilization, no zombies, no plagues of locusts, and at the same time, the destruction can become too much and lead to overstimulation. The individual pathways and the tracks are often more claustrophobic than previous entries, which is admittedly good for the thrills, just not good for my personal bubble. Compared to the colorful tropics of Pacific Rift, the grays and browns of Apocalypse make it harder to find your footing. And by the time the ending rolls around, it seemed like every apocalyptic event was already used up and there was nothing left to surprise the player. I heard they were going to end with a stampede of 10-foot-tall demonic stuffed rabbits, and I'm devastated that they voted against it. But the greatest sin of this game is that you have to unlock new vehicles online, which should be illegal. Even with these many gripes, no other racing environment can really compare to this. It is just plain, irresponsible, frantic fun. It absolutely lives up to its name, and fulfills everyone's fantasy of driving a car through the office. It's just as enjoyable to watch as it is to play, since not exploding for more than 30 seconds is an accomplishment all its own. Also, the sound design is absurdly good. Even though it's not my personal favorite of the MotorStorm PS3 trilogy, that's like saying it's the weakest of the Lord of the Rings movies. There's still nothing else like it. Maybe one day we'll get something that remotely resembles this kind of mayhem, but until that happens, we still have the memories and the migraines of MotorStorm. What's your favorite MotorStorm game? Got any other PS3 era games I should revisit? Have you recently seen a Canadian goose wearing sandals? Tell me everything in the comments.